Because forgetting Juli was not an accident, it was a necessity for those who needed a single narrative to rule many minds. And the deeper you dig into ancient calendars, outlawed rituals, and half-burned manuscripts, the clearer it becomes that Juli was never meant to disappear completely, but to be disguised, diluted, and domesticated, because you cannot simply erase a festival rooted in the sky itself, in the predictable turning of the sun, and so instead of denying it, power structures reframed it, telling people that what they felt in their bones during the darkest nights was no longer cosmic fear or ancestral memory, but religious joy, obedience, and gratitude. And yet the body remembers what doctrine forgets, which is why ancient Juli traditions survived underground in folk customs, in rural villages, in superstitions, mocked by scholars, like leaving food out at night for spirits, burning logs that must last 12 days, wearing masks to scare away wandering souls, singing chants meant to awaken the light, traditions later renamed caroling, Yule logs, festive costumes, all stripped of their original warning, because Juli was never innocent. It taught that light is temporary, that abundance always follows scarcity, that life survives only through balance, and ancient people understood that imbalance invited disaster, famine, disease, and social collapse, which is why Juli rituals were communal, not individual, because survival depended on cooperation, on shared resources, on collective memory, and this terrifies modern systems built on isolation and consumption, because Juli asked people to stop, to reflect, to remember the dead, to honor ancestors, to acknowledge that humans are not masters of nature, but participants within it, and that message is dangerous in an age obsessed with control, growth, and denial of limits. And when early Christian leaders absorbed Juli into Christmas, they did not just change symbols, they changed psychology, shifting focus from cosmic cycles to linear salvation, from repeating rebirth to a one-time miracle, from communal survival to personal belief. And this shift reshaped civilization itself, encouraging people to look forward to heaven rather than around at the earth, to accept suffering now for reward later, something Juli never promised, because Juli said survival is earned here and now, together, through wisdom, preparation, and respect for natural law. And perhaps that is why echoes of Juli feel unsettling today, because deep down we know we have lost something essential, something grounding. And this loss shows itself in seasonal depression, in the strange melancholy of holidays, in the sense that joy feels forced, scripted, incomplete. Because without acknowledging darkness, light feels hollow, and Juli demanded that darkness be faced honestly, that fear be named, that death be remembered, not hidden behind decorations and slogans. And ancient Juli nights were quiet, in ways modern holidays are not, because silence itself was ritual, listening to wind, to fire, to breath, to the world holding still. And in that stillness, people confronted themselves, their mortality, their place in the cycle. Something we now drown out with noise, sales, endless stimulation. And yet the calendar cannot lie. The solstice still arrives, the sun still pauses, the darkness still peaks, whether we acknowledge it or not. And Juli still happens, unseen but unfaded, because festivals do not die when renamed. They sleep inside culture, waiting for curiosity to wake them, and perhaps that is why this forgotten festival feels relevant now, in a time of environmental collapse, social fragmentation, and spiritual exhaustion, because Juli offers a different wisdom, one that says renewal is impossible without rest, growth without decay is illusion, and light without darkness is blindness. And when you understand Juli, Christmas itself changes, not as an enemy tradition, but as a layered one, a palimpsest of belief where ancient and modern overlap, where beneath every ornament lies a memory of fire, beneath every hymn a chant older than scripture, beneath every celebration a survival ritual disguised as joy. And this does not weaken faith, it strengthens understanding, because truth does not fear complexity. And perhaps the greatest power of Juli is not in reclaiming old gods or rejecting new ones, but in remembering that humanity once aligned its spirit with the cosmos itself, measuring time not by profit or productivity, but by light and shadow. And when you remember that, you begin to see holidays not as obligations but as mirrors, reflecting what a society values, fears, and hopes to become. And if Juli were remembered today, fully, honestly, it would ask uncomfortable questions. Are we preparing for darkness or pretending it does not exist? Are we honoring ancestors or erasing them? Are we celebrating rebirth or consuming distraction? And maybe that is why Juli was forgotten, because it demanded responsibility, awareness, humility, and collective care, values that cannot be sold easily, packaged neatly, or controlled from above. And yet, despite everything, Juli endures. Every time the year turns, every time the sun returns, every time humans feel that quiet pull inward in midwinter, a reminder that before Christmas existed, there was something older, deeper, truer to the earth, waiting not to be worshipped again, but to be remembered. And remembering Juli does not mean abandoning the present or rejecting what people hold sacred today. It means peeling back the layers of time to see how belief evolves, how power reshapes memory, and how ancient wisdom survives inside modern rituals like a buried heartbeat, still pulsing beneath the surface. Because once you recognize Juli, you begin to notice its fingerprints everywhere, not just in Europe, but across civilizations that never met, from Persian Yalda to Roman Saturnalia, from Norse Yule to ancient Egyptian solstice rites, all converging on the same cosmic truth that the darkest night is not the end, but the threshold. And that shared understanding should humble us, because it proves that long before borders, doctrines, and empires divided humanity, we were united by the sky itself, by the same sun rising and falling, weakening and returning, teaching early humans a universal language of cycles that transcended culture and creed. And Juli was one expression of that language, shaped by local landscapes and myths, but rooted in the same fear and hope that still live inside us. And when modern historians dismiss Juli-like festivals as primitive superstition, they reveal more about modern arrogance than ancient ignorance, because those early societies survived ice ages, plagues, and ecological shifts, not by accident, but by paying close attention to nature, encoding knowledge into ritual, story, and seasonal rhythm. And Juli was a library without books, a living calendar that taught when to store food, when to rest, when to slaughter animals humanely before winter scarcity, when to gather communities to prevent isolation and despair. And stripping these rituals of meaning did not make humanity more advanced. It made us forgetful, disconnected, and dependent on systems that promise endless growth in a finite world. Which is why revisiting Juli feels almost rebellious today, because it challenges the idea that progress means constant motion, constant consumption, constant light, and instead whispers that stillness is powerful, that rest is necessary, that darkness is not evil, but instructive. And perhaps that is the most radical message Juli offers to the modern mind, that survival is cyclical, not linear, and that rebirth requires surrender, not conquest. And when you frame it this way, you begin to see why ancient authorities treated solstice festivals with such seriousness, why mistakes in ritual were feared, why oaths were sworn, why kings redistributed wealth during winter festivals, because social imbalance was believed to anger cosmic order. And while modern science may reject the supernatural explanations, it quietly confirms the underlying logic, because inequality, isolation, and environmental disregard do destabilize societies. And rituals like Juli acted as social resets, forcing reflection, redistribution, and reconnection at the most psychologically vulnerable time of year, something our modern holidays often fail to do, replacing communal responsibility with individual spending. And this failure leaves a void, a sense that something is missing even amid celebration, a feeling many people cannot name but recognize deeply. And that feeling is memory, cultural memory, echoing across generations, reminding us that winter was once sacred, not because it was joyful, but because it was honest, and honesty breeds resilience. And perhaps that is why stories of light overcoming darkness still resonate so strongly today, because they are not inventions, but inherited instincts, passed down from nights when fire was life, when the sun's return meant survival, when hope was not abstract but measurable in minutes of daylight. And this perspective reframes even modern spirituality, suggesting that belief systems grow strongest when they align with human experience rather than deny it, and that the erasure of Juli was less about replacing falsehood with truth and more about replacing shared cosmic literacy with centralized authority. Because when people understand time, they question power, and when they question power, control weakens. And so Juli became folklore, then superstition, then trivia, and finally silence. Except silence never fully works, because humans are meaning-making creatures, and when old meanings are suppressed, new ones emerge in fragmented, distorted forms, in burnout, anxiety, seasonal sadness, environmental grief, and the quiet longing for rituals that feel real, grounding, and connected to something larger than the self. And this longing explains the modern revival of pagan aesthetics, solstice gatherings, nature-based spirituality, not as nostalgia but as correction, a subconscious attempt to restore balance in a world that has tipped too far toward abstraction. And even those who reject spirituality altogether still feel the pull of the season, still pause, still reflect, still sense that time itself behaves differently in late December. Because the solstice is not belief dependent, it is physics, and Juli was physics made meaningful. Astronomy translated into story, survival encoded into ceremony, and once you see it this way, forgetting Juli feels less like progress and more like amnesia, a loss we normalize because forgetting is easier than remembering complexity. And yet complexity is where truth lives, and truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. And that is why learning about Juli changes how you see history, holidays, and even yourself, because you realize you're not celebrating in isolation but participating in a tradition older than nations, older than scriptures, older than written language itself, a tradition born under stars, carried through fire, reshaped by empires, and still alive in the quiet moment when the longest night finally breaks, and light, slowly, almost imperceptibly, begins to return. And when that first imperceptible return of light happens, ancient people did not cheer immediately, because Juli taught patience, teaching that rebirth is subtle before it is spectacular, that true change begins invisibly, a lesson modern culture has almost completely forgotten, because we are trained to expect instant transformation, instant joy, instant miracles, while Juli respected gradualness, honoring the idea that the sun does not leap back into power but struggles day by day, breath by breath, just like human resilience. And this is why Juli rituals extended over many nights, sometimes 12, sometimes longer, marking not a single event but a process, a transition, mirroring how healing, growth, and renewal actually occur. And within those nights, storytelling was central, not entertainment but education, elders recounting ancestral survival, mistakes made during harsh winters, lessons encoded in myth so they would not be forgotten, because forgetting once could mean death the next year. And these stories were not sanitized. They included loss, starvation, fear, betrayal. Because Juli did not lie to its people, it prepared them. And when belief systems later replaced these narratives with idealized tales, humanity lost a training ground for emotional resilience, leaving many unprepared for suffering, confused when life inevitably darkened, because they were taught to expect light without cost. And this gap between expectation and reality is where despair grows, something ancient cultures understood intuitively, which is why Juli was as much psychological survival as physical, creating shared meaning in hardship, reminding individuals that suffering was not personal failure but seasonal truth. And that reassurance alone prevented despair from fracturing communities during the most dangerous time of year. And perhaps this is why remembering Juli today feels strangely comforting, even if unsettling, because it validates feelings modern society often dismisses, telling us it is okay to slow down, to feel heavy, to reflect, to mourn, to acknowledge limits. Because denial does not produce strength, acceptance does, and Juli acceptance extended even to death, because winter deaths were common, and the festival honored the dead openly, lighting fires not just for warmth but as beacons for souls, believing that the departed needed guidance through the long night. And while modern minds may reject the literal belief, the symbolic truth remains powerful, because grief, when acknowledged collectively, heals faster, and ignoring loss does not make it disappear. It only isolates those who feel it, and Juli refused isolation, insisting on togetherness even in silence, and when Christianity absorbed these elements, it preserved the warmth, but softened the confrontation, emphasizing hope over honesty, salvation over survival. And this shift reshaped not just religion but economics, because festivals like Juli included redistribution, feasting open to all, debt forgiveness in some cultures, recognizing that hoarding during winter endangered the entire community. And this ancient logic contradicts modern scarcity-driven systems, where winter becomes a marketing opportunity rather than a moment of care. And so Juli's disappearance also marked a moral shift, from collective responsibility to individual accumulation. And once you see this, the modern holiday season's contradictions become impossible to ignore. The loneliness amid crowds, the abundance beside deprivation, the enforced cheer masking exhaustion. Because without Juli's grounding framework, celebration floats disconnected from reality, and yet traces remain. stubborn, haunting, like the tradition of 12 days, the fear of bad omens at year's end, the instinct to clean, to reese, to forgive, to start anew, all echoes of Juli's function as a threshold ritual, marking the death of one cycle and the fragile birth of another. And thresholds are dangerous spaces in all cultures, moments when rules blur, when transformation is possible, which is why Juli nights were both sacred and feared, allowing masked figures, role reversals, temporary suspension of hierarchy, because rigid order could not survive transition. And this aspect terrified centralized authority, because people who experience temporary equality begin to imagine permanent change. And so these elements were restricted, regulated, or rebranded as harmless fun, stripped of their transformative edge. And yet transformation cannot be fully controlled, because humans need liminal spaces to process change, and without them, tension accumulates, erupting in less healthy ways, and perhaps the growing interest in ancient festivals today reflects a collective search for such spaces, a recognition that modern life lacks meaningful transitions, leaving people perpetually busy yet spiritually stagnant, and Juli offers a blueprint for reclaiming them, not by returning to the past literally, but by restoring rhythm, respect for cycles, and communal honesty. And this does not require abandoning modern belief, but expanding it, allowing multiple layers of meaning to coexist, because history is not a straight line but a woven fabric. And Juli is one of its oldest threads, and when you pull on it, you begin to see how deeply connected humanity truly is, across time, culture, and belief. United by the same sun pausing in the same sky, year after year, asking the same silent question, will you remember, or will you forget again?